There are moments in life when your heart feels heavier than your body, when the weight isn't something you can touch, but something that quietly crushes you from the inside. Maybe you've felt this lately, the sting of betrayal you never saw coming, the exhaustion of pretending to be okay, the guilt of choices you regret, or that quiet loneliness that slips into your chest when the world finally goes silent. You might even feel like something inside you broke a long time ago, and you've been trying to function around the crack ever since. If any of that sounds familiar, this story is for you. In a quiet American town tucked between two long highways and a line of dying trees, there was a man named Ethan Ward. To anyone passing by, he was just the middle-aged mechanic at Ward's Auto Servicer, small, aging workshop with peeling blue paint and a sign that leaned slightly to the left. But to Ethan, the shop wasn't just a place to fix engines. It was the last thing he still had control over, the only thing that hadn't abandoned him. His marriage had ended 2 years earlier. His relationship with his son Mason was hanging by a single thread, and somewhere along the way, Ethan had stopped fixing the things that truly mattered and started hiding inside the noise of engines and metal. The symbol of this story, the heart of everything you're about to hear, was an old rusted toolbox. It sat on the corner of his workbench, dented, scratched, the handle wrapped in faded black tape. Every mechanic who visited told him to throw it away, get a new one, upgrade. But Ethan couldn't. That toolbox had been his father's, and inside it were tools that still carried old fingerprints, memories, and lessons he refused to look at. It was both the heaviest and the most comforting thing he owned. And without realizing it, the toolbox represented the one truth Ethan avoided. He was still carrying wounds he never learned to repair. Every morning he unlocked the shop at 7 o'clock a.m. sharp. He worked with quiet precision engines, carburetors, brake pads, things he could understand because they broke in predictable ways. Humans weren't like that. Humans broke in silence, in secrets, in storms that didn't make noise until everything fell apart. And Ethan had stopped trying to fix anything that wasn't made of steel. Customers came and went. Cars came broken and left repaired. But Ethan stayed, the same tired eyes, stiff shoulders, a man who kept his voice calm because anything louder might reveal the chaos inside him. What he didn't know was that everything was about to change, because sometimes life brings you a stranger who isn't there to be fixed, but to show you what's broken inside yourself. The day everything began to shift was a Tuesday, ordinarily quiet, the kind of day that usually disappears from memory. Ethan had just finished replacing the brake pads on an old Chevy when the shop door creaked open. In walked a woman in her late 50s, silver-streaked hair tied loosely behind her, wearing a dark green coat and carrying a small, beaten-up leather notebook. She introduced herself as Margaret Hale, but everyone in town called her Maggie. Her car wasn't the problem, her voice was. Soft, strained, trembling in that way people sound when they've been holding too much inside for too long. She needed an oil change, but she lingered near the counter longer than required, eyes drifting over the workshop like she was studying something deeper than engines. Ethan tried to keep the conversation short, as he always did, but Maggie didn't leave. Instead, she walked toward the old rusted toolbox on his workbench and gently placed her hand on it. "You keep this close," she said. "People only keep things that close when they're afraid of losing the last piece of themselves." Ethan froze. No one talked to him like that. No one even noticed the toolbox except to tell him it was junk. But Maggie had said it with a strange mix of kindness and certainty, like someone who wasn't guessing, but remembering. "It's just a toolbox," he muttered. She smiled, not arguing, not correcting, just seeing through him in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Everything we keep is a story," she whispered. "And some stories get heavier when you avoid reading them." Her words unsettled him. He turned away, mumbling something about the oil change. But Maggie wasn't finished. She pulled her small notebook from her coat and opened it. Inside, rows of handwritten notes filled the pages, names, dates, drawings, little fragments of thoughts. "My husband kept one of these," she said. "He was a mechanic too. The tools weren't the heavy part for him. The memories were. Ethan didn't know why, but something cracked inside him, not loudly, not dramatically, but like a quiet shift in gravity. He looked at the old toolbox and, for the first time in years, really saw it. The scratches, the dents, the fingerprints of a man who had died much earlier than he should have. His father had been a good man, but he'd carried his own storms. Ethan inherited the tools, but he also inherited the silence. Maggie didn't stay long after that. She paid, thanked him, and left. But her words stuck to him like dust in his lungs. That night, alone in the workshop, Ethan sat on a stool and stared at the rusted toolbox until his eyes burned, because suddenly it wasn't just an object, it was a mirror, and he no longer knew how to look away. For the next several days, Ethan tried to shake off Maggie's words, but they clung to him like grease on his hands. No matter how many times he washed, they stayed. Every night he'd lock the shop, walk to his truck, then glance back through the window at that old toolbox sitting in the dim light. It felt like it was watching him, or waiting for him, and the more he avoided it, the heavier it became inside his chest. Then one evening, cold, windy, the kind where every sound feels a little sharper, Ethan finally gave in. He walked back into the silent workshop, turned on the single hanging lamp, and pulled the toolbox closer. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were the tools. Yes, but buried underneath the wrenches was something he hadn't seen in years. A folded piece of paper. His father's handwriting on the outside. Short, direct, familiar. For when the engines stop and the silence gets loud, Ethan swallowed hard, unfolding the letter with shaking fingers. Inside was a message his father had written long before he died. One Ethan had forgotten existed. The words weren't poetic or dramatic. They were simple, painfully honest. Ethan, machines are easy. People aren't. But don't hide in the things you're good at. The real work is the work you do on yourself. For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. Not because of grief he understood, but because the words felt like they'd been written for this exact moment, this exact version of him. He sat back, chest tight, memories flooding. How he'd buried his pain in work. How he'd avoided facing the collapse of his marriage. How he'd kept distance from his own son because closeness felt like danger. He whispered into the empty shop, "Dad, I don't know how to fix me." And that when the truth hit him. He had spent years repairing engines that weren't his, while letting his own inner engine rust. Ethan leaned over the toolbox, elbows on his knees, and for the first time in forever, he allowed himself to break quietly, slowly, like a man who finally stopped pretending he was made of steel. Now, listen carefully, because this part isn't just about Ethan. This is the part where the story turns toward you. If you've been avoiding your hurt, if you've been burying your mistakes, if you've been trying to outrun the parts of you that scare you, then hear this. You deserve to stop running. You deserve to open your own toolbox. You deserve to face what hurts, not because it's easy, but because you're worth repairing. You don't need to fix everything tonight. You don't need to become a new person in a week. You don't need to pretend you're strong every second. You just need to take one honest look at the thing inside you that you've been avoiding. Because healing doesn't start with power. It starts with truth. And Ethan was finally ready to stop hiding. Ethan didn't change overnight. Real change never respects the impatience of broken hearts. But something inside him had shifted, quietly but permanently. The next morning he arrived at the shop before sunrise, placing his old toolbox in the center of the workbench, like a truth he was finally ready to live with. When customers came, he looked them in the eye. He listened. Slowly, he realized the more he allowed himself to feel, the less he felt like he was drowning. A few days later, a friend saw the open toolbox and said, "Good. Now that you've seen the truth, don't forget to build something with it." Those words were the final spark. That evening, he went to his son's apartment. He didn't offer excuses. He simply said, "Son, I'm trying to learn how to fix the things inside me, and I don't want to lose you." And that was enough.